Thank you. Yes, I would like to address this relationship between nature and architecture, which is actually a very long-standing relationship. And in a sense, nature has been seen as a model for architects for a long time, but not always used. And biomimicry is clearly a movement in architecture where nature is seen as sort of the ultimate development, the ultimate evolution that we should look at, that we should learn from. But my talk is focused on something that goes slightly beyond biomimicry, or probably the integration of a biomimetic thinking and a bionic thinking, both together. So biomimicry has sort of, in my opinion, three main topics. One is the structural biomimicry. This is sort of in the 1950s. Eero Saarinen's TWO terminal and the work that was done then after that in the 60s and 70s, where architects and engineers were looking at Darcy Thompson's 1970s on growth and form, and they were looking at these grand spans and new tectonics in architecture. Also the morphological biomimicry means that buildings start looking like animals or sea creatures, like Peter Cook's and Colin Fournier's Kunsthaus Graz, built in Austria in 2003. And also another phase, which is the environmental biomimicry. This is the Eden project, which is both structural and environmentally intelligent, in the sense that these large spans covered with ETFE panels are so light that there's hardly any steel behind it, means a lot of light can pass through these membranes and really avoid large problems of heating in the winter. But this is biomimicry. I'm interested in the fact that architecture is starting to absorb and integrate and host nature in its own skin. This is Van Hoven's Sport Plaza in Amsterdam. The whole building is basically covered with vegetation. It almost disappears as a piece of vegetation. But this is mainly a surface condition. As you can see here, this is a very thin membrane where vegetation with its own ecosystem is sort of growing on the surface and the skin of the building. Now, this idea is not new. This is the ultimate wish of architects, which is to plant seeds. And from the seeds, you grow furniture. You grow pieces of buildings, tables, chairs, whole cities. This is William Katavalos, 1961. And this is John Johansson working on this molecular engineered house, which clearly grows from hardly anything into a fully designed functional piece. This is sort of the ultimate vision on our surrounding being in evolution and grown. Now, in order to achieve this, materials play obviously a very important role. This is bioconcrete. This is Henk Jonkers at the TU Delft working on the idea that this concrete is infused with extremophiles, which are bacteria that can live in the most extreme conditions and can heal cracks of concrete together. At the same time, we also look at other materials, probably the most basic one, which is the brick. The idea of a bio-brick. This is Ginger Dozier at the University of Sharjah, who just invented a system that brick doesn't have to be burned in a kiln. And with over 1 trillion bricks burned and produced every year, the amount of carbon dioxide that is produced is just extraordinary. And the possibility that you grow these bricks rather than burning them and having a sense of durability and performance that is equal to the normal bricks is just fantastic. This is another case, as Steve Pike was a UCL, Bartlett UCL graduate, who thought about surfaces that can be covered with growth medium and respond to the use of spaces. In other words, with us in this room and with the bacteria that is in the air that we project into space, these surfaces start growing fungi that reflects what we do in this space. So he took 6 pieces and put them in different locations in London. And you can see in this bottom left one, he put it in a bakery, and that's the fungi that grows from the bacteria in the air. This, on the right-hand side, are the dirty Bartlett carpets, which have basically layers and layers and layers of work of models that students have done. Now, what is fascinating about this is the idea that architecture could be responsive to our presence and what we do in space. And the fact that architecture is not dealing with a sterile air environment, as the modernists of the 20th century thought, but our air is profoundly qualified with bacteria. This is another thought where materiality plays a role. These are protocells that Rachel Armstrong, who was previously at the Bartlett, in this installation of Philip Beasley, talks about these basic components that can be programmed. They're like small, tiny computers, and the possibility that they then start creating matter that can be grown into something larger. And probably the most influential material for architects in this field is algae. Now, algae is obviously used now for biofuels, for energy gaining, for the food industry. This is a bioreactor done by Richard Beckett here at UCL. And what is fantastic about algae is that it can be now used on various scales in architecture, bearing in mind that architects always have the difficulties of dealing with scale. They deal with very large scales, and growing stuff grows rather small. In order to bring it into the vision that William Katavalos had before, you have a big leap and a big step to do. Now, this is the smallest scale of something very practical. This is a lamp. This is done by Mike Thompson in Holland. This lamp is nothing more than a bit of water, a bit of algae inside, a bit of light. You blow your carbon dioxide into the lamp, and you get the thing going, and you get light. Here you have some people at the University of Cambridge, Dr. Alex Driver and Carlos Peralta, dealing with a whole table that could be used as a surface to create photosynthesis. And researchers at the University of Stanford found out that there's very small electric currents that you can extract from algae when they create photosynthesis. And so they use that in order to produce light on this lamp. And that means that the table is not only a surface where you do things, it has another function to produce energy. And I come back to Richard Beckett, who proposed this idea of bioluminescent light, which is another alternative for the future. Rather than having electrically powered light, you have only algae that has bioluminescent qualities, and it could illuminate a whole space. And on the large scale, you have Make Architects with their research team, Shane Affleck with Bill Watts from Max Fordham, thinking of covering whole buildings, large-scale buildings, where the facades, rather than being only cladded with steel or glass, could be cladded with algae tubes, producing, on a very, very large scale, biofuels. And that means that the carbon footprint of buildings could be lowered and, in fact, turned into the reverse production line. Now, one could imagine that on an even bigger scale, that the production of algae might be a new vision for what our urban agricultural landscape will look like. This is Richard Beckett and Alexa Rizova thinking about an agro-city for Taipei, a city that has lost its agricultural past and could become infused with these vertical algae growth components that bring a completely new sense into the city. Or more and more farms and buildings that create sort of sponge-like constructions. This dystopian farm for New York by Eric Verne. So the conclusion of my talk is that rather than biomimicry or bionic thinking, it's probably the joint venture of both. I think there is a synthetic approach, a symbiotic approach between nature and architecture. This is an installation we are working for the Olympics this summer, where the piece of architecture with this installation is becoming a piece of nature. It looks like that, and digital fabrication, digital technologies are allowing it to do it with an enormous amount of perfection and rigor. On the other hand, it hosts, as a scaffold, vegetation that grows into it. And also, it hosts algae. And the algae itself, with the algae team of UCL, is engineered and designed into its detail. And probably this is the most radical statement. This is a current graduate who looked at the sloth. And the sloth is an extraordinary animal, because Maria found out that the sloth's skin is full of fur, which is very long, which is full of cyanobacteria that grows in the fur. And that means that you can get up to 950 beetles in this fur. You also have a moth that is specific to the sloth's fur that doesn't grow anywhere else in the world. Now this means that the sloth is carrying around a whole ecology. It's an animal that moves very little, moves probably just a bit more than any building moves, and it creates this whole ecosystem that it carries around. And so this is the interpretation of the future vision of architecture, where architecture is not an artificial construct, but due to its hosting of all the natural world, it moves, it behaves, it grows, and it's in itself an ecology. Thanks very much.